When Boston producer Armand van Helden remixed Tori Amos's Professional Widow, he made a #1 smash in the UK and a huge club hit all around the world. But how the hell did he go from this to this? And why was he even asked to in the first place? Professional Widow is on Boys for Pele, Tori Amos's third album. Now, even if the only thing you knew about Tori Amos was that her album was called Boys for Pele, and by the way, that's nothing to do with the footballer Pele. The boys are her men from past relationships, and particularly the one she'd just broken up with. And Pele is a Brazilian volcano goddess. You can probably tell she's not exactly the sort of mainstream pop star that we normally see in 2026. In interviews, she is, and I don't say this to offend if you're a fan of hers, but a full-blooded weirdo. And in 1996, you could be a full-blooded weirdo and still be heavily backed by a major record label who would give you the money to lock yourself away in a church in Ireland to record an album. You could put harpsichord on that album. You could make insane songs and then still be picked up by Steven Spielberg, who would put them on the soundtrack of his movie about tornadoes. It was just a very different time. The record label was swimming in money because it was the 90s and people actually paid for music then. So what did they do with that money? Well, they went shopping. And one of the things they wanted to buy was remixes by cool, credible DJs who would bring a different audience to Tori Amos's music. They went to Boston DJ Armand van Helden, who was quickly becoming one of the go-to guys for remixes. If you look at the sort of list of artists he'd worked with up to this point, and he'd done over 50, it's a real who's who of kind of forgotten 90s acts. You got Ace of Base, Reel to Reel, the Bucketheads. He'd also worked for some artists who stand the test of time a bit better, like Blondie. He'd done a remix of Atomic. He'd done a remix of Bizarre Love Triangle by New Order. And one of Cotton Eye Joe by Rednecks as well. But, they can't all be winners. Anyway, he was given the call by the label and he was given the stems on a DAT. And he was given about $10,000, which he says was actually a bit below his normal rate at the time, which shows you kind of how much money was swimming around the record industry at the time. Now, straight away about this remix, I want to point out one thing, and it's the bass line. The bass line is instantly recognizable, very hooky, very cool. And I'd assumed it was sampled from some old soul record or funk record. In fact, it's built up from the bass line of the original track, which if you listen to the original, just seems so unlikely. Armand van Helden had never heard Professional Widow before he agreed to do the remix. In fact, he says he'd never heard of Tori Amos before. So he was just combing through the DAT that he was given, listening for something that he liked. And when he heard this part of the bass line, his ears pricked up. Now, in interviews talking about this massive smash that he had, Armand will say that he took one bar from the bass line, looped it, and that was pretty much the basis of the record. But I've isolated the stems of the record, picked up the bass line, and unless I'm going absolutely insane, there is no one such bar. He had to really chop it up and find different bits. And he put a totally different feel to the bass line. The original is raucous and it keeps changing tempo all the way through. And it kind of rocks, but with the best will in the world, it is just not funky. Now, the guy Tori Amos had brought in to play on this record definitely was funky. George Porter Jr. is best known as one of the founding members of The Meters, one of the funkiest bands of all time. If you only know one track by them, it's probably Sissy Strut, but you'll have heard samples of them all over the place on things like One Thing by Amory and My Love Is Your Love by Whitney Houston, one of the most sampled bands of all time. So it's kind of ironic that Armand van Helden was sampling this bass line, even though he didn't know who was playing on it, even though he didn't really know the artist he was recording for. Now, I've taken the bass line from the original track and I've dropped it into an app on my phone called Koala, just to show you what Van Helden did. He took this little pop, this very small section of bass, and then he took this part and pitched it up a couple of semitones to finally make this. And if I add a bit of the beats for context, I think I'm close, but if you think I've got this wrong and I've missed the actual sample, then please tell me in the comments, because it's been driving me crazy and I would just love to know. Now, the lyrics of Professional Widow are very sexual and dark, Tori Amos has said that they're about her Methodist preacher father, and she's also said it's about the parts of us which are Lady Macbeth. But I think she has to keep saying all these things because people keep asking her, is it about Courtney Love? A professional widow in that period in the 90s, you would kind of naturally think of the recently widowed Courtney Love. But Tori Amos kind of denied it. She said, Courtney and I have never spoken. We've never spoken about it, and we've never spoken, and I think it's best kept that way. But then again, she was once on British TV, and she said this.
It was Professional Widow was inspired by or based on Courtney Love. What is it about her?
Allegedly. I think that when you're part of a peer group, you learn things about each other, and there's a way that you treat people. And sometimes if you treat people in a certain way, maybe years later it comes around and bites you. Maybe. I'm saying that Courtney has made certain choices. I've made certain choices, and so have you, and so have you.
So yeah, it's about Courtney Love. Now the vocals on the remix are all taken from the original track, and it's kind of fun to hear them in context.
Honey, bring it close to my lips, yeah. Honey, bring it close to my lips, yeah. It's gotta be big, I said. It's gotta be big.
There are a couple of different sounds on the record that I've not been able to place, but there is at least one kind of proper sample. It's taken from Trinidad by John Gibbs and the US Steel Orchestra. Now, John Gibbs was a steel pan, like a steel drum player from Trinidad and Tobago, and he moved to Philadelphia in the 70s to try and mix steel drum music with disco. He only made a few records, and he didn't sell that many records, but he was played a lot by David Mancuso and Larry Levan at the Paradise Garage. Massively influential DJs, massively influential clubs. So he did kind of really leave his mark on music in that way. That name, by the way, the US Steel Orchestra, at first I thought it might be one of those names like the SO Trinidad Steel Band that used to tour with Liberace back in the day, where the band was named after their sponsor. There were quite a few of them at the time, but it doesn't seem to be what happened here. In fact, later records are released under the name John Gibbs and the Unlimited Sound of Steel Orchestra. So US Steel just stands for Unlimited Sound of Steel? Not quite sure. He's not an artist who has a lot written about him. Couldn't find out all that much information, and the records themselves are pretty rare. Now if we take that John Gibbs sample, add a bit of EQ, add a kick, and that bass line, and then the vocals, you've pretty much got it. Now, the remix was a massive smash in the UK and Ireland. If you stop someone on the street in Britain and ask them about Tori Amos, it's probably the only track most people can name, even though she had, and still continues to have, a lot of huge fans of hers. But it's the only song of hers that really broke through into the mainstream. Armand van Helden followed up this remix by remixing CJ Bolland's Sugar is Sweeter, and pretty much kicking off the whole UK garage scene. If you disagree with that, please tell me in the comments. I know you will.